I know on our last show we talked about, how close the rapture is, because a la Wolverud, when you see the Christmas decorations go up, Thanksgiving's around the corner. And I was just reading it. Oh, where is it? The Thessalonians, where it says he's like, the falling away. So I wanted to get some insight on that too, because the falling away was actually, apostasia, which on earlier English versions before Jimmy wanted to really nail it to the Catholic Church. Oh, the falling away, but it really means departing. And he's like, hey, so there they are, and they're like, hey, the day of the Lord came. We missed the rapture. And Paul's like, hold on a second here. You're going to see the departing first, then the Antichrist, then the day of the Lord. But I wanted to see your take on that, Mondo, as far as the falling away, because a lot of people say it's the falling away now of the church. I kind of have a different view that it's actually the departing. I think we're going to see the rapture first. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. The Did a presentation on that in one of our recent conferences, but kind of take a middle view in
Hmm.
that there are two major views, as you mentioned. One of them is that it is a falling away or an apostasy of the church,
Hmm.
and that goes along with First Timothy 4:1. And in the latter days, many will depart from the faith. So you have some correlation there. The other view is that the word apostasia refers to a physical departure, and then within that logical, conclusion is that this is a reference to the actual physical departure of the church in the rapture. I think originally I would say, a few years ago, 5, 6, 10 years ago, I used to lean towards the physical departure view, and then a few years ago, Lee Brainerd came out with his book on apostasia, where I think he answers all the linguistics, the history, that the church, what you just mentioned, the church, the English translations as well as the church. I think he he made an overwhelming case that it cannot refer to a physical departure of the church based on linguistics. But people could get his book on that apostasia. But my view is a little bit different, because I actually think that several of the things that Dr. Andy Woods, who I respect highly, he brought up. He believes that it's a physical departure of the rapture. And one of the things, he wrote an article for a magazine a few years ago, and one of the things he mentioned in there is that when it says the apostasia, the departure, it's a definite article in the Greek, and so it makes it pretty challenging to say if it refers to an apostasy of the church. Well, how would you know when that take place? Because we know that First Timothy 4 is very clearly that there's a departing in the latter days, but there is no definitive moment of the apostasy of the church. It began happening in the 1850s in the seminaries and mainline denominations, and so how would you ever know
Hmm.
that the apostasia happened, the departure happened in a moment? And so I think he makes a great argument against the idea that it's the apostasy of the church. So the short story is, I actually think it's referring to, within the context of the passage, especially verse 4. I think the apostasy is the Jewish people. When they make an agreement with the Antichrist, they are making an apostate decision to align themselves with a false Christ, and that would solve the problem of that it not being a church departure. Because how would you know that? But if there is a singular departure by the Jewish people with the Antichrist, which again all those things line up, it would fit very nicely, because right there in the verse it talks about the man of sin being revealed in verse 3, and then into verse 4 it discusses him sitting in the temple of God, which is Jewish. And so I think that the day, and we know as well that it says the day of the Lord cannot be present unless the apostasy happens first and the man
Hmm.
of sin is revealed. And so we know that what starts the day of the Lord, the tribulation period, it's a covenant with the Antichrist. We know in Daniel 9:27. So I think the apostasy fits very nicely with that. But this is kind of a short answer, because I developed it further. But again, I'm not dogmatic on it. There's a lot of different opinions. So there's three main opinions on it. But nevertheless, we do know that the church is going to depart from the faith because of First Timothy 4:1. So we don't need
Hmm.
Second Thessalonians 2:3 for that, because we're certainly observing the church having fallen away, living in the age of Laodicea.
Hmm.
Very, very
Hmm.
sad, no doubt.
Well, that's interesting. I think the key thing is that the day of the Lord, people think that's the rapture. It's not. That's the second coming, right?
Right.
So we did that. But here we are. We just had a show talking about how close we are to the rapture and all these different things that are happening, and we talking about the earthquakes and all the things that are going on in Israel. So here we are. We're recording this right in the middle of August of 24. Crazy things are happening, and I'm telling you that because it literally changes minute by minute now. Um, so I've been saved since I was 15 and started looking for things back then, and you really had to go search for things and say, "Oh, look, there's a piece of prophecy," and then a couple months later you might find another one, and when we're
Mhm.
here, and now it's like a fire hose. It's like, okay, well, wow, look at this, and then look at this, and look at this. So, what are some of the things you're seeing today, Mondo, as far as like the prophecy of Israel doing what they're doing, Gog and Magog? Now Ukraine invades Russia,
Mhm.
and it's like, what's that going to cause? Because like Derek, Derek, he believes that the Gog and Magog is the hook in the jaw is not oil; it's something else. So I'd like to get your take on that and where we are in our time frame.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I'm going to be doing a presentation here in a few weeks, actually, in California, for Brandon Holthouse. There's the conference on geopolitics, and one of the things that I'm going to develop there a little bit more is the what you just asked, the chronology, because we have certain markers within the biblical narrative. One of them certainly is the second coming, right? All Israel will be saved, and so we know that's the goal as well for the Lord. He wants to save Israel, and so I think if we look at some of those prophetic markers that we know for sure, again at the end of the tribulation, Israel gets saved. Then we know a little bit before in the midpoint of the tribulation that they take flight. Jesus says, "If you're in Judea when you see the abomination of desolation, flee for your lives. Don't even go down to grab your coat. So and get out of town." So we see that Matthew 24:15 passage and 16 aligns quite nicely with Revelation 12, where the Antichrist comes into play and then he sends a flood after Israel, the woman, in Revelation 12, and then he begins to chase her and to seek her for 42 months or 3.5 years. So we know that the last 3.5 years is very, very problematic for the people of Israel. Again, they're fleeing for their lives. We know as well from Zechariah 13:8 and 9, that two
Mm.
thirds of Israel is going to be killed in this devastation by the persecution of the Antichrist. So if you kind of go backwards, you could see, well, then where does where does Israel's with the geopolitics there? What does Ezekiel 38 come into play? Because if you go back to the first part, the signing of the covenant, the start of the 70th week of Daniel,
Hmm.
we know that they somehow come under the protection of this Antichrist figure who makes a covenant with them. Daniel 9:27. The Hebrew is it can actually be translated that he causes to prevail a covenant
Mm.
for the people, and so you have this idea that what covenant is he prevailing in the land? I actually think it's a reference to the other places in Daniel. It's a reference to the Mosaic covenant, which again is very nice, ties into the temple. And so, which ties in again, Daniel 9:27, sacrifices. And so,
Hmm.
context is very, very important there.
I lean
So,
in that
anyways,
direction too.
yeah. So, if you go backwards, you see, okay, what's happening now? Let me just say this. So, right now, if you look at Israel, people have gone to Israel, you see that 80% of Israel is secular. I mean, they just
Hmm.
are. They don't care about a temple. In fact, there's this major tension between the secular Israelis and the religious, the other 20%. Because why? Well, the religious, their kids, their children don't have to serve in the military. They're not conscripted. Every other secular person does, boy or a girl. So you also have the religious, they get paid from the government to study Torah. And so you have, and they want a temple. They want this idea. And the secular people don't care about a temple. And so, in fact, this tension has been there for a long time in that when you look at the story, imagine you're a secular Israeli and your daughter is in the military, your son, and these quote crazy wacko religious right. They want to build their temple and start World War III with the Muslims, and then who's going to have to fight in that war?
Mm.
Well, it's going to be my kid, who's going to have to go fight for this ridiculous religious temple that I don't even care about. It means nothing to me. So their kids aren't going to be killed for it. So you have this again, this tension. But the question that comes up is this: that at the time of the confirmation or the making of the covenant in Daniel 9:27, the 20% of Israel, why was still that's not a lot. So why is Israel going to even care about the covenant sacrifices or the Mosaic covenant and doing it else? Something has to change. And I think what has to change, or what's going to bring about change, is what you just said, Ezekiel 38. So imagine, again, we have these truths. Again, the end of the tribulation, the midpoint, the start, Ezekiel 38. So we don't know exactly when all these are going to take place. But what we do know is Ezekiel 38 says, after God miraculously rescues Israel and saves them from the Gog Magog coalition, it says, then they shall know. So, my
Mhm.
speculation, which again, all we can do, is that that's going to happen right prior to the start of the 70th week of Daniel, where the covenant is signed. Because imagine for a moment that you have, it doesn't mean they get saved, but you have a switch that all of a sudden these secular people see God rescue them. It's supernatural. I mean, they're going to be like, so this idea of God being there is real. This existence of God, this theism is going to come to play. And they're going to be now spiritually hungry, looking for answers. The rabbis are going to say, we need a temple. So you're going to have, I think you're going to have a shift in Israeli culture,
Mhm.
in that they're going to want something that they didn't have because of the rescue that just happened. So again, I'm speculating here. I don't know for sure. We're trying to fit it all together, but I think that would be a great marker for what changes the culture to even care about having a temple, because right now they don't.
Exactly. And then, it's going to come to that point where they'll have no choice. You'll have to say this was God. There's no other way to describe it. And I think that's, the crux of our show is showing all these things. Now we're seeing all the nations of the world gathering around to come against Israel. And here we are, the clown show in the West going, are you coming to take a spoil? Hello.
Yeah.
We're like right there. And my square root clock is ticking down.